The razor trembles 3 inches from flesh. Ezekiel stands in the darkness behind Master Cornelius Ashford, the straight blade catching fractured candlelight like a sliver of moon. His hand, weathered, scarred, steady through 40 years of pouring wine and folding linens and performing 1,000 invisible services, shakes now for the first time in memory. The silver handle feels impossibly heavy, as though it contains the weight of every indignity, every stolen moment, every swallowed scream that has accumulated in the marrow of his bones. Lord Almighty, Ashford intones, his voice rich with the confidence of a man who has never questioned his place in the divine order. Grant me continued wisdom in managing the property you have seen fit to bestow upon my care. Guide my hand in matters of discipline and prosperity alike. The master's head is bowed, silver-threaded hair gleaming in the amber glow of 12 candles arranged around the private chapel's altar. He kneels on an embroidered cushion, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles have gone white with the fervor of his supplication. The prayer book lies open before him, its gilt-edged pages reflecting light like scales. He cannot see Ezekiel standing behind him. He has never truly seen Ezekiel at all. The grandfather clock in the corridor beyond marks each second with mechanical precision. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound a countdown, a measured beat toward something inevitable and irreversible. The chapel smells of melting tallow and old wood and something else, something rotten that no amount of beeswax polish can quite disguise. A decay that seeps from the very foundations of Dunridge Manor itself. Ezekiel's breath comes shallow. The razor wavers. 3 inches becomes 2. Ashford continues his prayer, oblivious, secure in the knowledge that midnight has always belonged to him, that this ritual performed every night for 30 years will unfold as it always has, will end as it always has, with him rising from his knees, blessed and righteous and utterly unchanged. But tonight is not like other nights. Tonight, something fundamental has shifted in the architecture of Ezekiel's soul. Tonight, the careful distance he has maintained between thought and action has collapsed entirely. Tonight, the blade that has shaved the master's throat 1,000 mornings without drawing blood hovers with a different purpose entirely. The candlelight throws their shadows against the chapel wall, master and servant frozen in a tableau that will shatter at any moment. Or perhaps has already shattered, and they simply haven't realized it yet. How did we arrive at this precipice? How does 40 years of invisible servitude culminate in a single moment of visible rage? The answer stretches back through decades, but it crystallizes most sharply in what happened just 3 hours earlier, in the fading November dusk, in the moment when Ezekiel understood that some losses cannot be borne, that some prayers are answered only in blood. But to understand that moment, we must first understand the place itself. Dunridge Manor crouches in the Virginia Piedmont like something that has grown from the red clay rather than been built upon it. It rises 3 stories of weathered brick and warped wood in Rappahannock County, some 12 miles from the town of Woodville, and half that distance from the muddy ribbon of the Rapidan River. The locals speak of it in hushed tones, have done so for years before this night, will do so for years after. There is something wrong with the manor, they say, something in its bones. The building presents a face of colonial grandeur to the dirt, road that winds past its gates, white columns and broad verandas and windows that catch the morning sun just so. But closer inspection reveals the rot beneath the polish. The columns lean slightly southward, as though trying to distance themselves from the house proper. The verandas sag under the weight of decades. The windows, when approached at certain angles, seem not to reflect light so much as absorb it, turning it into something dim and tarnished. Inside, the decay is more pronounced. The floorboards creak not with age but with accusation. The wallpaper, imported at great expense from Philadelphia, has begun to peel in the corners of rooms where terrible things have occurred. The portraits of previous Ashfords glare down from the walls with expressions that might be pride or might be warning. And everywhere, in the dining room, the library, the servants' quarters, the chapel itself, there hangs the persistent smell of something rotting, something that has died in the walls and cannot be extracted no matter how many fires are lit, or windows opened, or prayers recited. The manor has stood for 73 years, built by the current master's grandfather with money earned from tobacco and the labor of people who had no choice in the matter. It has witnessed 3 generations of Ashfords, each adding their own refinements, their own cruelties, their own contributions to the invisible ledger of suffering that accumulates in places like this. The whipping post is visible from the dining room windows, positioned with such deliberate precision that one wonders whether it was meant to aid digestion or ruin it. The cellars contain iron rings set into stone walls, their purpose unmistakable. And the chapel where Cornelius Ashford now kneels in prayer was consecrated by a bishop who accepted generous donations and never asked difficult questions. Ezekiel knows every inch of this place. 40 years of service have made him more familiar with Dunridge Manor than with his own body. He knows which floorboards creak and which do not, which doors hang crooked on their hinges, which window panes let in drafts that can extinguish candles. He knows the master's routines with the precision of a watchmaker: wake at 6, breakfast at 7, inspection of the fields at 8, dinner at 6 in the evening reading at 8, midnight prayer at 12, exactly. He knows the weight of the master's coat, the precise temperature he prefers his coffee, the way he likes his newspapers folded and his boots polished and his nightshirt laid out just so. This knowledge has been his survival, his camouflage, his cage. For 40 years, Ezekiel has been invisible, not unseen. Master Ashford sees him constantly, barks orders at him, occasionally offers what he believes to be fatherly advice. But invisible in the way that furniture is invisible, present but not quite real, functional but not quite human. The master has never asked Ezekiel's opinion on matters of philosophy or politics, has never inquired about his dreams or fears, has never acknowledged that a man who serves wine might also thirst, that hands which fold linens might also yearn to create something of their own, that a heart which beats steadily through decades of service might also break. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of history where horror and truth intertwine, subscribe now and ring the bell so you never miss a tale from the shadows. Drop a comment below telling me what historical horror story I should uncover next. Ezekiel came to Dunridge Manor at the age of 12, purchased at an estate sale in Richmond along with a mahogany sideboard and a set of silver candlesticks. The previous master, Cornelius's father, had noted his quick mind and quiet demeanor and decided he would make an excellent house servant. The training had been meticulous and brutal. Every gesture practiced until perfect. Every response rehearsed until automatic. Every hint of personality or preference is systematically erased like chalk marks from a slate. He learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to move through rooms without disturbing the air, to hear everything and repeat nothing, to arrange his face into an expression of pleasant neutrality that betrayed no opinion, no judgment, no interior life whatsoever. He learned which beatings came from genuine infractions and which came from the master's need to assert dominance. And he learned that there was no practical difference between the two. By the time Cornelius Ashford inherited the manor at age 30, Ezekiel had already been perfecting his invisibility for 18 years. The new master accepted his service as he accepted the furniture and the land, as an inheritance, a birthright, a natural order that required no justification. And so the years accumulated, seasons turned, masters aged and died and were replaced by sons who resembled them in every particular. The enslaved people of Dunridge Manor lived and worked and sometimes loved and frequently died, and Ezekiel served through it all with the precision of clockwork, his humanity compressed into something so small and dense it might as well have been coal, ready to ignite if anyone ever struck the spark. That spark was struck 3 hours ago, in the fading light of a November evening that smelled of coming frost. Ezekiel had been in the upper hall, trimming the lamp wicks as he did every evening before dinner, when he heard the sound of hoofbeats on the drive. Nothing unusual in that. Dunridge Manor received its share of visitors, traders, and neighbors and men on their way to somewhere more important. But something in the cadence of those hooves made him pause, made him set down his scissors and move to the window. In the circular drive below, a wagon had pulled to a stop. Not the elegant carriages that sometimes delivered guests, but a crude conveyance with iron bars across the back, the kind of wagon that carried cargo too valuable to risk escaping. A trader sat up front, a thick-necked man Ezekiel recognized from previous visits, a man who made his living moving human beings down the river roads toward the deep south, toward the cotton fields and cane plantations where life expectancy was measured not in years but in harvests. And in the back of that wagon, visible through the bars, sat 6 figures in chains. Ezekiel's heart had lurched once, violently, like a bird striking a window. He couldn't see their faces from this distance, couldn't identify them, but something in his chest knew before his mind caught up. Some primitive instinct sensed the wrongness, the violation, the presence of something that should not be absent. He'd abandoned the lamp wicks and descended the servants' stairs with as much speed as dignity would allow, emerging into the November dusk just as the wagon began to roll away. Too late to intervene, too late to even call out. Not that calling out would have accomplished anything except to earn him a beating. He stood in the drive and watched the wagon diminish into the distance, watched it take the turn toward the Fredericksburg Road, watched until even the dust had settled, and there, in the mud where the wagon had paused, he found it, a headscarf. Faded indigo, worn soft with years, patterned with small yellow flowers that had almost disappeared from washing. He knew it instantly, would have known it blind. Had seen it every Sunday for 16 years, wrapped around hair that curled like his own, framing a face that shared his cheekbones and his careful eyes. Dinah's headscarf, his daughter, his child, the one piece of himself he had been allowed to keep, to watch grow from infant to woman, to love in the cramped and careful way that enslaved fathers loved, knowing that love made you vulnerable, that anything you cherished could be weaponized against you, Master Ashford had promised. Just last month, standing in the library with a brandy in hand, the master had remarked on Dinah's competence in the weaving house and said she would remain at Dunridge for the foreseeable future. A stable operation needs stable workers, he'd said, as though conferring a favor, as though promising not to tear apart a family was an act of extraordinary benevolence rather than basic humanity. The promise had been a lie. Or perhaps not even that. Perhaps simply words that meant nothing. Vapor that dissipated the moment something more profitable presented itself. Ezekiel had stood in the drive, holding that indigo headscarf, and felt something inside him that had been compressed for 40 years finally, irrevocably crack. Now 3 hours later, he stands in the chapel with a straight razor in his hand. Now, the grandfather clock continues its countdown. Now, Master Cornelius Ashford prays for continued prosperity in managing his property, utterly unaware that the property has decided to manage itself. The blade moves closer. 2 inches becomes 1, and in the space of a heartbeat, everything is about to change. The headscarf weighs nothing in Ezekiel's hand, yet it pulls him to his knees in the mud like an anchor. The indigo fabric is still warm, still carries the faint scent of the lye soap Dinah used, still holds the shape of her head where she wore it just hours ago. He kneels there in the drive as the November dusk deepens to full dark, and for the first time in 40 years Ezekiel weeps. Not the silent tears that come in the night when memories of his mother surface unbidden. Not the single drop that escaped when he buried his wife, Hannah, 12 years past, dead from a fever the doctor wouldn't come to treat. This is something raw, something that claws its way up from the compressed coal of his humanity and emerges as a sound he doesn't recognize as his own, a keening that belongs to wounded animals, to mothers who have lost children, to men who have finally understood that hope is cruelty's favorite weapon. He weeps until his throat burns and his ribs ache, until the cold seeps through his knees and the darkness is complete. And then slowly he rises, folds the headscarf with the same meticulous care he brings to folding the master's newspapers, tucks it inside his jacket, against his heart, where it burns like coal itself. When he walks back to the manor, something fundamental has shifted in his gait. The other enslaved people of Dunridge notice it immediately, though none speak of it aloud. They have learned to read each other in the language of glances and pauses, in the invisible telegraph that passes between people who cannot afford the luxury of direct speech. Mercy sees it first. She's at the kitchen hearth preparing the master's evening meal, roasted quail and potatoes, apple tart with cream, the kind of feast that requires hours of labor to look effortless. She's 53 years old, has cooked at Dunridge since she was 7, knows every recipe by heart and by scar. Her hands bear the permanent marks of burns and cuts. a map of service written in damaged flesh. When Ezekiel enters through the kitchen door, she looks up from the quail she's basting and sees something in his face that makes her hand still on the ladle. "Brother?" she says quietly, using the term they use for each other when the master cannot hear, the reminder that they are family by choice if not by blood. "What's happened?" Ezekiel cannot speak. His throat has closed around words that would be too dangerous to voice, too final to take back. Instead, he simply shakes his head and continues through to the servants' hall, leaving Mercy staring after him with an expression that mingles understanding and dread. Silas sees it next. He's coming in from the forge, his massive frame silhouetted against the red glow of banked coals, his leather apron still carrying the heat of the day's work. Silas is perhaps 35, though he's never known his exact age, was sold away from his mother too young to remember birthdays or celebrations. He's the kind of strong that makes white men nervous, the kind that requires constant supervision lest he remember his own power. His hands can bend iron, can shape metal into horseshoes and hinges and chains. Those same hands have also been chained. He crosses paths with Ezekiel in the yard between the forge and the main house, and in the lantern light that spills from the kitchen window, he sees what Mercy saw. Silas stops walking, places one enormous hand on Ezekiel's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that requires no words. Ezekiel meets his eyes for just a moment longer than servants typically look at each other, a moment weighted with unspoken understanding, and then moves on. By the time Ezekiel reaches the upper floors to perform his evening duties, Caleb knows as well. Caleb is 18, born right here at Dunridge, the son of a woman who died bringing him into this world and a father who was sold south when Caleb was too young to remember his face. He works the stables, has a way with horses that Master Ashford calls natural instinct, without recognizing the irony of denying him humanity while crediting him with animal understanding. Caleb has been watching the horizon for years now, has been planning his escape with the careful patience of someone who knows that premature action means death. He's in the upper hall when Ezekiel emerges from the master's chambers, having laid out the evening clothes and turned down the bed. Their eyes meet. Caleb is young enough that rage still shows plainly on his face. He hasn't yet learned the mask of neutrality that takes decades to perfect. But tonight, he sees that same rage reflected in Ezekiel's eyes, and it startles him. Ezekiel, who has always been the model of control, the exemplar of invisible service, the man who could be beaten and would not cry out, now carries something volatile in his expression. "They took Dinah," Ezekiel says quietly. Just 3 words, but they contain multitudes. Caleb's jaw tightens. He knew Dinah. Everyone knew Dinah. She was kind to him when he was small, used to sneak him extra cornbread from the weaving house, used to tell him stories about a grandmother she remembered, who could predict the weather by tasting the air. In another world, another life, she might have been his friend, his sister, something more. In this world, she is cargo rolling toward Mississippi in chains. "When?" Caleb asks. "Today, 3 hours past." They stand in the hallway as the grandfather clock strikes 9, its chimes echoing through the manor like a countdown. 3 hours until the master's midnight prayer. 3 hours until Cornelius Ashford will kneel before his altar and thank his God for the prosperity that comes from tearing families apart. "Something's coming," Caleb says. It's not a question. Ezekiel doesn't answer, but he doesn't need to. Something is indeed coming, has been coming for 40 years, has been building like pressure behind a dam, waiting for the moment when the structure can no longer hold. He continues with his duties because duty is all he has ever known, serves the master's dinner at 6 o'clock precisely, pouring wine with hands that do not shake, offering dishes with the same practiced grace he has performed 10,000 times before. Master Ashford eats his quail and potatoes without looking up, without noticing that the man who serves him has been fundamentally altered. Why would he notice? Ezekiel has never been real to him, has never been more than an extension of his own will, a tool that performs tasks and requires no more acknowledgement than a particularly reliable pocket watch. "Excellent meal as always," Ashford remarks more to himself than to anyone present. "Tell Mercy she's outdone herself with the tart." "Yes, master," Ezekiel replies, the words ashes in his mouth. After dinner, he clears the dishes, washes them in the kitchen while Mercy watches him with worried eyes, dries them and returns them to their places in the china cabinet. performs every task with the same meticulous precision that has defined 40 years of service. But now each action feels like rehearsal for something else, like the careful preparation an actor makes before stepping onto a stage where the script has been thrown away. At 10 o'clock, he climbs to the master's chambers to prepare for bed, lays out the nightshirt and cap, places the Bible on the bedside table, open to Psalms as the master prefers, ensures the chamber pot is cleaned and the water pitcher is filled. Turn down the bedclothes just so with the precise fold the master has always demanded. And then, moving with the automatic grace of long habit, he retrieves the straight razor from its place in the shaving kit. The razor is a beautiful thing in its way, silver handle engraved with the Ashford crest, blade of Sheffield steel that can split a hair lengthwise. Ezekiel has used this razor on the master's throat 1,000 mornings, has learned the exact angle and pressure required to remove stubble without drawing blood, has perfected the art of making another man vulnerable, without ever acknowledging the power dynamic inherent in holding a blade to someone's neck. Tonight, he holds the razor up to the lamplight and examines it as though seeing it for the first time, tests the edge against his thumb, still sharp from this morning's shave, sharp enough to open flesh like butter. The silver handle catches the light and throws it back in fractured patterns that dance across the ceiling. From somewhere below, he hears the grandfather clock strike 11. 1 hour until midnight. 1 hour until Master Ashford will climb the stairs to his private chapel and kneel before God and pray for continued guidance in managing his property. 1 hour until Ezekiel stops being invisible. He slips the razor into his jacket pocket. Opposite the indigo headscarf, and the symmetry feels significant. On one side, what he has lost. On the other hand, what he will take. The weight balances perfectly, as though his entire life has been preparation for this equilibrium. At 11:30, he descends to the kitchen one final time. Mercy is still there, sitting by the banked fire with her Bible open on her lap, though he suspects she isn't reading. Silas has come in from the forge, unusual at this hour, and sits across from her. Caleb leans against the doorframe, his young face set in hard lines. They don't speak when Ezekiel enters, but their presence speaks volumes. "You don't have to do nothing," Mercy says finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can't bring her back. Can only bring trouble down on all of us." "I know," Ezekiel replies. "Going to do it anyway," Silas observes. "It's not a question." "I am." They sit in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling, the clock ticking, the weight of what's unspoken pressing down on all of them like a physical force. Finally, Mercy rises, crosses to where Ezekiel stands, places both hands on his weathered face and looks into his eyes with an expression that contains no judgment, only a terrible understanding. "Then may God have mercy," she whispers, "on all of us." The grandfather clock begins to chime at midnight, 12 deep notes that resonate through the manor's bones, that mark the hour when prayers begin, that countdown to the moment when everything changes. Ezekiel climbs the servant's stairs for the last time. His footsteps make no sound. 40 years have taught him where to place his feet to avoid the creaking boards. He moves through the upper hall like a ghost, like something that has always been here and always will be, like the rot that seeps from the walls themselves. The door to the private chapel stands open, as it always does at midnight. Candlelight spills into the corridor. From within comes the sound of Cornelius Ashford's voice, raised in prayer, thanking his God for blessings he does not deserve, asking for guidance he will never follow, performing his nightly ritual of manufactured piety. Ezekiel's hand closes around the razor in his pocket. The silver handle is warm now, heated by proximity to his body, to his heart, to the coal of compressed humanity that is finally ignited. He steps into the chapel, into the candlelight, into the moment that has been 40 years in the making, and behind him, unseen but present, the manor itself seems to hold its breath. Dunridge Manor has been watching for 73 years, not watching in the way that houses and ghost stories watch, with malevolent consciousness and supernatural intent, but watching in the way that places absorb what happens within their walls, the way wood and stone and mortar become repositories for memory, the way buildings can become complicit simply by standing witness. If you pressed your hand against the dining room wallpaper, you might feel the accumulated years thrumming beneath your palm like a pulse. If you stood in the cellar long enough, you might hear echoes that have nothing to do with acoustics. The manor was built in 1758 by Cornelius Ashford's grandfather, a man whose portrait hangs in the main hall with eyes that follow visitors with unsettling precision. He chose this location deliberately, high ground overlooking the Rappahannock River. Good soil for tobacco, close enough to Fredericksburg for commerce but far enough for privacy. Privacy in this context meant freedom to conduct business that preferred not to be scrutinized too closely. The foundation stones were laid by men who had no choice in the matter, mixed with mortar and blood and the sweat of people who built their own cages. The architecture reflects the grandfather's sensibilities, grand without being ostentatious, elegant without warmth. The windows are positioned to maximize light in the public rooms while leaving the working areas in perpetual dimness. The servants' stairs are narrow and steep, designed to keep the help invisible as they move between floors. The cellars are deep and well ventilated, the better to preserve both wine and other things that required darkness and chains. Over the decades, each generation of Ashfords has added their own refinements. Cornelius's father installed the grandfather clock that now dominates the central hall, its brass pendulum swinging with metronomic precision, its chimes marking the hours like a judge's gavel. He also built the private chapel on the second floor, consecrated by Bishop Morrison in 1803, its walls lined with dark wood paneling that seems to drink light rather than reflect it. The chapel was meant as a gesture of piety, a demonstration that the Ashfords were God-fearing people who took their spiritual obligations seriously. That it stands less than 50 feet from rooms where people were routinely beaten into submission apparently struck no one as ironic. Cornelius himself, upon inheriting the manor at age 30, focused his improvements on comfort rather than morality. He imported furniture from Philadelphia and Boston, the mahogany sideboard in the dining room, the escritoire in the library, the four-poster bed that dominates his chambers. He had the floors refinished and the walls repapered, covering over water stains and cracks with patterns of roses and vines that were fashionable in Richmond society. He installed better locks on certain doors, reinforced certain chains, made adjustments that increased efficiency without changing the fundamental nature of what Dunridge Manor was built to do. But beneath all these refinements, the rot persists. It starts in the foundation, where the original stones were set into earth that never quite settled properly. Over the years, the manor has developed a slight list to the south, imperceptible unless you place a marble on the floor and watch it roll. The list has caused cracks to spiderweb through the plaster, hairline fractures that reappear no matter how many times they're patched. In certain rooms, the cracks form patterns that look almost deliberate, almost like writing in a language no one can read. The floorboards have their own vocabulary. The third step on the main staircase groans under weight like a living thing. The hallway outside the master's chambers creaks in a specific sequence that Ezekiel has memorized. 6 steps of silence, then 2 that announce presence, then 4 more that allow for stealthy approach. He's learned to avoid the announcing boards, to place his feet in the gaps between complaint and confession, to move through the manor as though he's part of its structure rather than separate from it. The wallpaper tells stories in its slow decay. In the library, where Master Ashford keeps his ledgers and his collection of philosophical texts that argue for natural hierarchies and divine ordination, the paper has begun to peel near the fireplace. The pattern, roses and thorns in repeating columns, has yellowed around the edges, creating the impression of flowers dying in real time. Behind the peeling sections, older paper is visible, and behind that, older still, layers upon layers of attempted beautification covering walls that have heard too much. The portraits are perhaps the most unsettling element. They line the main hall and the staircase, a genealogy of Ashford faces stretching back 3 generations. The grandfather, stern and unsmiling, his hand resting on a book that might be a Bible or a ledger. The father, slightly softer around the edges but with the same calculating eyes. And Cornelius himself, painted 5 years ago by an artist from Richmond, depicted in his prime with one hand on a horse's bridle and Dunridge Manor visible in the background, a monument to prosperity and permanence. But it's the older portraits that draw the eye. The ones from before photography made representation literal. The artist who painted the grandfather had a peculiar style, rendering the eyes with such precision that they seem to track movement across the room. Visitors have remarked on it for decades, how unsettling it is to walk past those portraits, how they seem to judge and find wanting, how their expressions change depending on the angle and the light. Ezekiel has walked past those portraits countless times each day for 40 years. He dusted their frames, straightened them when they hung crooked, and removed cobwebs from their corners. He's never felt they were watching him specifically. He's never been important enough to warrant watching. But tonight, as he moves through the manor in the hours before midnight, he senses something different in their painted gazes. Or perhaps he's simply seeing them clearly for the first time, recognizing that he and these portraits share something fundamental. They are both witnesses to what happens in Dunridge Manor, both unable or unwilling to speak of it, both complicit in their silence. The smell is everywhere, strongest in places where violence has occurred most frequently. The dining room carries it beneath the aroma of beeswax and lamp oil, a sweet corruption that has nothing to do with the flowers Mercy arranges on the sideboard each morning. The cellars reek of it even in winter when the cold should preserve rather than decay. And the chapel, for all its consecration and candlelight and prayers, cannot quite mask the underlying scent of something that has died without proper burial. Master Ashford doesn't notice it, of course. He's lived here all his life, has become so accustomed to the smell that it's simply part of the manor's character, like the creak of floorboards or the draft that comes through the library windows. But visitors notice. They comment on it obliquely, mentioning that the Virginia air seems particularly humid, that old houses have their peculiarities, that perhaps the ventilation could be improved. They never stay long. The enslaved people of Dunridge notice it most acutely. They live with it constantly, work in rooms where it's strongest, understand viscerally that they are both victims and sources of this decay. When someone dies, from fever or injury or the simple exhaustion of being worked past human endurance, the smell intensifies for weeks afterward, as though the manor is digesting another sacrifice, incorporating another death into its foundation. Tonight, as Ezekiel performs his final duties, the manor feels different, more present somehow, more aware. He moves through the evening routine with mechanical precision, serving dinner, clearing plates, preparing the master's chambers, but he's conscious of the house around him in a way he's never been before. The floorboards seem to speak more loudly. The portraits follow his movement with greater intensity. The smell of rot grows stronger, as though something long buried is pushing toward the surface. At 11:15, he enters the master's chambers to ensure everything is prepared for the night. The room is a monument to comfort built on suffering. The four-poster bed with its heavy curtains, the escritoire where Ashford keeps his personal correspondence, the wardrobe that holds suits tailored in Richmond and boots polished to mirror brightness. The chamber pot sits discreetly in the corner. The Bible rests on the bedside table, open to Psalms as always. Ezekiel moves to the shaving kit, which sits on the washstand beneath the window. Inside, arranged with the precision of surgical instruments, are the tools of the master's morning routine: the brush, the soap, the strop, the razor. He lifts the razor from its place, tests its weight, examines his reflection in the blade. The face that looks back at him is one he barely recognizes, older than he feels, weathered beyond his 52 years, marked by decades of compression and control. For 40 years, this razor has been a tool of service. He's wielded it with perfect precision, scraping away stubble without ever cutting the skin beneath, maintaining the careful boundary between servant and served. The master has never feared this blade, has never considered that the man holding it might have motivations beyond duty, might harbor thoughts beyond obedience. That lack of fear is itself a form of violence. Ezekiel slides the razor into his jacket pocket. The weight of it pulls slightly to one side, a gentle insistence that makes him conscious of his own body, his own capacity for action rather than reaction. On the other side of his jacket, he feels the answering weight of Dinah's headscarf, balanced, symmetrical, almost peaceful. The grandfather clock in the hall begins its 11 o'clock chime. 1 hour remaining, 60 minutes until Master Ashford climbs the stairs to his private chapel. 60 minutes until the midnight prayer that has occurred every night for 30 years encounters an interruption. It was never designed to survive. Ezekiel leaves the master's chambers and descends the servants' stairs one final time. His feet find the silent spots automatically. Muscle memory accumulated over decades. But tonight he's aware of each step in a way he's never been before. Conscious that he is not simply moving through Dunridge Manor, but moving with it. That after 73 years of watching and accumulating and absorbing, the house itself has perhaps been waiting for this night. In the kitchen, the others are gathered. The fire has burned down to embers that cast more shadow than light, and somewhere above, the chapel candles are being lit in preparation for midnight. The manor holds its breath and waits. The kitchen breathes with human presence in the near darkness. 4 people who share no blood but everything else. Shared suffering, shared invisibility, shared understanding that tonight the carefully maintained order of Dunridge Manor teeters on the edge of something irreversible. Mercy sits closest to the dying fire, her Bible closed now on her lap, her work-scarred hands folded over the worn leather cover. She's raised 3 children in this kitchen, buried 2 of them before their 5th birthdays, watched the 3rd, a daughter named Grace, sold away to a planter in South Carolina when she was barely 13. That was 17 years ago. Mercy doesn't know if Grace is alive or dead, thriving or suffering, and the not knowing is perhaps worse than certainty. She's learned to live with it the way she's learned to live with burns and cuts, as permanent damage that no longer surprises but never quite stops hurting. Silas stands near the door, his massive frame blocking most of the lamplight that spills in from the yard. His arms are crossed over his chest. Leather apron still in place, though the forge has been cold for hours. There are scars on those arms, some from the inevitable accidents of metalwork, others from more deliberate sources. The largest runs from his left shoulder to his elbow, a raised ridge of tissue that he received at age 20 when he'd tried to run. The patrollers had caught him before he'd made it 5 miles, had beaten him nearly to death, and Master Ashford's father had finished the lesson with a branding iron heated in Silas's own forge. The scar tissue has long since replaced the brand, but Silas remembers the shape it made. He remembers everything. Caleb paces in the narrow space between the preparation table and the pantry, restless energy contained in a young body that hasn't yet learned the stillness that comes with decades of enforced patience. He's the only one born at Dunridge, the only one who's never known another place, and somehow this makes his captivity more rather than less chafing. He has no memories of freedom to sustain him, no before time to compare against the present, only the growing awareness that his entire existence has been circumscribed by walls and rules and the whims of people who consider him property. And Ezekiel, standing in the doorway with the straight razor in one pocket and his daughter's headscarf in the other, looks at these 3 people and sees something he's never quite articulated before. A family forged in the furnace of shared trauma, bound by invisible threads stronger than blood. She's halfway to the Carolinas by now, Mercy says quietly, breaking the silence that has stretched since the grandfather clock struck 11. Maybe further. These traders move fast when they get fresh cargo. The word cargo lands like a stone in still water. That's what Dinah has become. Not a woman with her mother's hands and her father's careful eyes. Not a skilled weaver who could create patterns of startling complexity. Not a person who laughed at Caleb's jokes and shared her cornbread with the children and sang hymns on Sunday mornings with a voice like water over stones, cargo, inventory, property, in transit, he promised, Ezekiel says, his voice rough with disuse. He's spoken more words in the past 3 hours than he typically speaks in 3 days. Last month, standing in the library, he looked me in the eye and promised she'd stay at Dunridge. Promises don't mean nothing, Silas rumbles from his position by the door. Not their promises to us. We're furniture that talks. You don't negotiate with furniture. Then maybe furniture should stop talking, Caleb says, his voice tight with barely contained rage, and start doing. The words hang in the air like smoke. Mercy's hands tighten on her Bible. Silas's expression doesn't change, but something in his posture shifts, becomes more alert. And Ezekiel feels the razor in his pocket as though it's burning through the fabric. Careful, boy, Mercy warns. Careful what you speak into being. Words have power, especially words like that. Power. Caleb spits the word out like poison. What power we got? We can't read without getting whipped. Can't leave without getting hunted. Can't even keep our own children. Where's the power in that? The power to endure, Mercy says firmly. The power to survive. The power to wait for the Lord's justice. The Lord's justice? Caleb's laugh is bitter beyond his years. The Lord's justice lets them sell us like livestock while they pray for prosperity. The Lord's justice lets them quote scripture while they beat us. If that's the Lord's justice, then maybe— Hush! Silas interrupts, his deep voice cutting through Caleb's tirade like a blade through cloth. Don't speak blasphemy on top of everything else. Whatever happens tonight, we don't need that burden too. Whatever happens tonight. The phrase settles over them like a shroud. Ezekiel moves further into the kitchen, lets the door close behind him. In the dimness, with only the dying fire for light, they could be anyone, anywhere. They could be free people planning a harvest or discussing weather or sharing stories. For just a moment in this pocket of time between 11 and midnight, they can pretend the world outside this kitchen doesn't exist. But it does exist. And upstairs, Master Cornelius Ashford is preparing for his midnight devotions, utterly unaware that the servants he's never truly seen are gathered in his kitchen, having a conversation that will determine whether he survives until dawn. Something's been building, Silas says after a long silence. Not just tonight. Not just because of Dinah, something bigger. You feel it? The others nod slowly. They do feel it. A pressure in the air, a sense of approaching storm that has nothing to do with weather. It's been building for weeks, maybe months, maybe years. Small things accumulate into something larger. The way Master Ashford has been selling off more enslaved people lately, citing falling tobacco prices and the need to consolidate resources. The way his prayers have grown longer and more fervent, as though he senses divine judgment approaching and hopes to forestall it with increased piety. The way the manor itself has seemed to decay faster, cracks appearing in walls, floorboards rotting through, the smell of corruption growing stronger no matter how much cleaning is done. Heard things, Caleb offers, from the traders who come through. Talk about rebellion down in Southampton County a few years back. Talk about people in the north who think the whole system is sinful. Talk about— He lowers his voice even further, though they're alone. About places where people like us can be free. Canada. Places so far north the slave catchers can't reach. Dangerous talk, Mercy warns, but there's less conviction in her voice than before. All talk is dangerous, Silas counters. Silence is dangerous too. Everything we do or don't do can get us killed. At least talking feels like living. The grandfather clock begins its quarter-hour chime. 11:15, 45 minutes until midnight. Ezekiel pulls the razor from his pocket, holds it up to catch the firelight. The blade gleams, sharp enough to split hairs, sharp enough to open flesh with barely any pressure at all. The others stare at it with expressions that mingle fascination and horror. This is what it's come to? Mercy asks softly. This what Dinah's loss has made necessary? Not just Dinah, Ezekiel replies, his voice steady now, almost calm. Dinah is the last crack in the dam, but the dam's been weakening for 40 years. For my whole life, for all our lives. How much water can be held back before the structure fails? You do this, Mercy says, and they'll kill you. Hunt you down and hang you in the town square as a warning. They'll make an example that'll terrify enslaved people for 50 miles around. Maybe, Ezekiel acknowledges. Or maybe they'll wonder. Maybe they'll lie awake at night wondering which servant stands behind them. Which hands that pour their wine might also pour their blood. Maybe fear works both directions. If this story is gripping you, show your support by hitting that subscribe button. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe in justice beyond the grave? Your engagement keeps these forgotten histories alive. Silas uncrosses his arms, takes a step forward. His shadow stretches across the kitchen floor, immense and dark. You're not alone in this, he says quietly. Whatever happens, whatever you do, you're not alone. Caleb nods agreement, his young face set in hard lines. Been alone our whole lives, even when we're surrounded by people. Maybe it's time we stopped being alone. Mercy closes her eyes, and for a long moment the only sound is the crackling of embers in the hearth. When she opens them again, there are tears on her weathered cheeks, but her expression has hardened into something resolute. The Lord forgive us, she whispers. For what we're about to allow. For what we're about to become. Or maybe, Ezekiel suggests gently, the Lord will understand. Maybe the Lord has been waiting for us to save ourselves since heaven seems disinclined to intervene. They sit in silence as the clock ticks toward 11:30. Outside, the November wind picks up, rattling the windows, making the manor creak and settle. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl calls out, a sound like mourning, like warning, like prophecy. When the grandfather clock chimes the half-hour, Ezekiel rises, slides the razor back into his pocket. The others rise as well, a wordless choreography of shared purpose. They don't embrace. Physical affection between enslaved people is discouraged. seen as distraction from work, but they stand close, drawing strength from proximity. 30 minutes, Silas says. 30 minutes, Ezekiel confirms. Mercy picks up her Bible, holds it against her chest like a shield. Caleb's hands curl into fists, then relax, then curl again. Silas's jaw sets in an expression of grim determination. And throughout Dunridge Manor, the candles burn. In the chapel, 12 flames await the master's arrival. In the kitchen, embers glow. In the darkness between, something ancient and patient continues its vigil. The manor has been watching for 73 years. Soon, it will witness something new. The grandfather clock begins its midnight chime. 12 deep notes that resonate through Dunridge Manor's bones, that mark the boundary between Thursday and Friday, between November 9th and November 10th, between one world and another. Each note is a pronouncement, a judgment, a countdown toward something that cannot be taken back once begun. Ezekiel stands at the base of the main staircase as the first chime sounds, his hand resting on the carved newel post that generations of Ashfords have touched in passing. The wood is smooth beneath his palm, worn by decades of casual contact, and he wonders if it remembers all those hands, if it distinguishes between the touch of masters and the touch of servants, or if wood is more democratic than flesh, accepting all contact with equal indifference. The second chime. He begins to climb. The stairs are familiar enough that he could navigate them blind. 16 steps to the landing, turn, 14 more to the second floor. He's climbed them countless thousands of times, bearing trays and linens and messages, always moving with the practiced invisibility of perfect service. Tonight his footsteps sound different to his own ears, heavier somehow, weighted with intention rather than habit. The third chime. The fourth. Master Cornelius Ashford is already in the chapel. Ezekiel can see the candlelight spilling from the doorway, can hear the rustle of fabric as the master arranges himself on the embroidered kneeling cushion, can catch the faint scent of the beeswax candles mixing with the underlying rot that permeates every room of this house. The fifth chime. The sixth. Ezekiel's hand moves to his jacket pocket, feeling the outline of the straight razor through the fabric. His other hand presses against Dinah's headscarf, still warm against his chest, still carrying her scent. The symmetry steadies him. What was taken? What will be given in return? Not justice, perhaps. Justice would require a scale that could weigh 40 years of servitude, that could measure the weight of stolen children and broken promises and casual cruelties accumulated like compound interest. But something, an answer even if the question was never properly asked. The seventh chime. The eighth. He reaches the second-floor landing. The hallway stretches before him, lined with portraits that seem to watch with greater intensity than usual. The grandfather's stern face, the father's calculating eyes, and Cornelius himself, painted in his prime, one hand on a horse's bridle, master of all he surveys, confident in the natural order that places him above and others below. The ninth chime. The 10th. Ezekiel walks down the hallway toward the chapel. His feet find the silent boards automatically, decades of practice making his approach soundless. Not that it matters. Master Ashford wouldn't notice if he stomped. After 40 years, Ezekiel's presence registers no more than furniture, no more than the candlesticks or the prayer book or any other object that serves a function without requiring acknowledgement. The 11th chime. The 12th. He stops in the chapel doorway. The room is small, perhaps 12 feet square, lined with dark wood paneling that absorbs light rather than reflecting it. The 12 candles arranged around the altar provide illumination that seems to darken rather than brighten, casting shadows that pool in corners and gather beneath the simple wooden cross mounted on the far wall. A single stained glass window installed by Cornelius's father depicts the Sermon on the Mount, Christ with one hand raised in blessing, the multitudes gathered at his feet. In daylight, the window glows with colored light. At midnight, it's simply black glass. Master Cornelius Ashford kneels before the altar on his embroidered cushion, hands clasped, head bowed, the very picture of devotional piety. He's 57 years old, well-fed and prosperous, with silver threading through dark hair and the soft middle that comes from a lifetime of others' labor. He wears his nightshirt and a brocade dressing gown, feet bare, as vulnerable as he ever allows himself to be. The prayer book lies open before him, its gilt-edged pages reflecting candlelight. He begins to pray. Almighty and everlasting God. His voice rises with practiced resonance, the voice of a man accustomed to being heard and heeded. I come before you this night as I do every night, humbled by your manifold blessings and grateful for the stewardship you have entrusted to my care. Ezekiel steps into the chapel. His shadow falls across the wall, elongated by candlelight, but Ashford doesn't turn. Why would he? The butler's presence at this hour is no more remarkable than the candles themselves, both simply elements of the ritual. Lord, grant me continued wisdom in managing the property you have seen fit to bestow upon my keeping. Ashford continues, his eyes closed in fervent concentration. Guide my hand in matters of discipline and prosperity alike. Help me to be firm but fair, as you are firm but fair with your children. The words land like stones. Property, discipline, prosperity. A vocabulary that transforms human beings into commodities, cruelty into stewardship, theft into divine mandate. Ezekiel has heard this prayer hundreds of times, has stood in this doorway or waited in the hall while the master performed his nightly devotions, and the words have always carried a certain obscenity. But tonight, with Dinah's headscarf against his heart and the razor in his hand, the obscenity becomes unbearable. Bless the work of my hands and the increase of my holdings, Ashford prays. Protect my investments from disease and rebellion. Keep my household in order and my fields productive. Let those who serve me do so with willing hearts, recognizing that in serving me they serve you, for all authority comes from your divine ordination. Ezekiel's hand closes around the razor, slides it from his pocket with movements so practiced they're nearly automatic. 40 years of handling this blade, of wielding it with precision, of maintaining the careful boundary between tool and weapon. The silver handle is warm from his body heat. The Sheffield steel catches candlelight and holds it. Lord, I know I am not perfect, Ashford continues, his voice taking on the slight tremor that indicates he's reaching the emotional crescendo of his prayer, the moment when he convinces himself of his own humility. I know I stumble and fall short of your glory, but I trust in your mercy and your wisdom to guide me toward righteousness. I trust that you see my heart, that you know my intentions are pure, that any hardships I must inflict are done in service of your greater plan. 3 steps bring Ezekiel directly behind the kneeling master. Close enough to see the silver threads in his hair. Close enough to smell the lavender water he uses after shaving. Close enough to count the vertebrae visible beneath the collar of his nightshirt. So close, and yet Ashford remains utterly unaware, lost in his communion with a God who apparently endorses the transformation of humans into property. Grant me the strength to continue in my duties, Ashford prays. Grant me the courage to make difficult decisions when necessary. Grant me the prosperity to maintain this household for generations to come, that my sons and grandsons might inherit the wisdom you have granted me, and might continue the work you have blessed with such abundance, sons and grandsons. Inheritance and continuation. The assumption of futurity, the confidence that tomorrow will resemble today, that the order of things is fixed and immutable, that prayers will always be answered and harvests will always come and servants will always serve, because that is simply the nature of reality. Ezekiel raises the razor. His hand is steady now, decades of accumulated rage distilled into perfect control. The blade hovers 3 inches from Ashford's neck, then 2, then 1. In the candlelight, his shadow merges with the master's shadow, becoming one dark shape against the chapel wall. And Lord, Ashford continues, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more personal. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for providing all that I need, for placing in my path the resources necessary to prosper. Thank you for, the prayer ends mid-word, not with a scream, there's no time for that. Not with a plea or a prayer or any recognition of what's happening. Simply ends the way a candle ends when snuffed, present one moment and absent the next. The sudden silence is profound, overwhelming, a vacuum where sound should be. For a long moment nothing moves. The candles continue to burn. The shadows continue to pool in corners. The stained glass window remains black against the night. And Ezekiel stands with the razor in his hand, watching blood spread across gilt-edged pages, watching the very paper that held prayers for prosperity become saturated with the cost of that prosperity. Master Cornelius Ashford slumps forward, his clasped hands falling apart, his forehead coming to rest against the altar as though in even deeper supplication. The prayer book lies beneath him, open to Psalms, the words obscured now by spreading darkness. The embroidered cushion darkens as well. The careful needlework, done by enslaved hands in the quarters, stitched during evening hours after field work was complete, absorbing what it was never meant to. Hold, the grandfather clock in the hallway continues its measured ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Marking seconds that stretch and dilate, that feel simultaneously like eternities and instants. Time has not stopped, but it has fundamentally changed character, has shifted from something that measures routine into something that measures consequence. Ezekiel lowers the razor. Look at it as though seeing it for the first time. The blade is dark now, no longer catching candlelight. His hand is steady. His breathing is even. He feels nothing, no triumph, no horror, no relief, no regret. Just a vast emptiness, as though something that has been compressed inside him for 40 years has finally, irrevocably released, leaving only hollow space behind. From somewhere below, he hears a sound. Breaking glass, perhaps, or a door slamming, or a cry quickly stifled, sounds that suggest he is not alone in this night's work, that whatever has possessed him has possessed others as well, that the dam hasn't just cracked but collapsed entirely. The candles flicker as though touched by wind, though no windows are open, and Dunridge Manor, which has been watching for 73 years, watches still. The silence after the prayer ends lasts exactly 7 seconds. Ezekiel counts them without meaning to, the habit of measuring time ingrained after 40 years of synchronizing his movements to the master's schedule. 7 seconds during which the world reorganizes itself around a new reality, during which the natural order that has governed Dunridge Manor for 7 decades ceases to exist, and something else, something raw and ungoverned, takes its place. Then, from somewhere below, the sound of shattering glass. The noise breaks the spell. Ezekiel's hand, still holding the razor, still steady, moves automatically to wipe the blade on a corner of the altar cloth. The gesture is purely reflexive, born from decades of cleaning and maintaining, of ensuring tools are properly cared for regardless of their use. The white linen accepts the darkness, absorbs it into embroidered patterns of vines and crosses stitched by hands that were never paid for their labor. He sets the razor on the altar beside the prayer book, where both objects rest like sacramental items in some inverted liturgy. Then he simply stands looking down at what was Master Cornelius Ashford and is now merely a body, merely meat that will begin to cool and stiffen, merely matter that has ceased to matter in any meaningful sense. Another sound rises from below, this time unmistakably human. Not a scream exactly, but something between a shout and a sob, a sound that contains multitudes of emotion too complex to be named. It's followed by the crash of furniture overturning, the thunder of footsteps, the splintering of wood that might be a door being forced or a chair being weaponized. Whatever has begun, Ezekiel is not its only author. He moves to the chapel window, the one that depicts Christ delivering the Sermon on the Mount. Through the black glass he can see very little, just shadows moving in the yard below, and what might be lamplight spilling from the kitchen, and something that flickers orange in a way that suggests fire. The forge, perhaps, or something else burning. It's impossible to tell from this height through this darkness. Behind him the candles continue their vigil. 12 flames that were lit to illuminate prayer now illuminate something else entirely. The shadows they cast seem deeper than before, more substantial, as though darkness itself has gained weight and presence. Ezekiel turns from the window and walks out of the chapel without looking back. His feet carry him down the hallway past the portraits of Ashford ancestors, past the grandfather clock that continues its imperturbable ticking, past the master's, chambers where the bed has been turned down and will never be slept in. He descends the main staircase, 16 steps to the landing, 14 more to the ground floor, moving with the same silent precision he's employed for 40 years, though there's no longer any need for silence. The main hall is in chaos. Silas stands near the library entrance, his massive frame silhouetted against lamplight. In his hands he holds something iron, a poker from the fireplace perhaps, or a tool from his forge. His leather apron is spattered with darkness that might be blood or might be ash. His expression is terrible in its calm, a man who has made a decision and carried it through and now stands in the aftermath without flinching. Mercy emerges from the dining room, her Bible clutched against her chest like a shield. her face wet, with tears that might be grief or relief or some compound of both. She sees Ezekiel on the stairs and their eyes meet, and in that moment an entire conversation passes between them without words. What have we done? What have we become? What happens now? Caleb appears from the direction of the kitchen, moving, with the restless energy of youth confronted with the enormity of transgression. His hands are empty but shaking, his young face caught between exhilaration and horror. "The overseer," he says, his voice cracking. "He came to investigate the noise. He won't be investigating anything else." How many? The question hangs unspoken in the air. How many participated in this night's work? How many acted, and how many simply stood witness? The answer seems to shift in the shadows, to multiply or divide depending on perspective. 3, 5, all of them? Does standing aside while something happens constitute participation, or does only direct action count? The moral mathematics are too complex to calculate, and perhaps it doesn't matter. Dunridge Manor has been broken open, and everything that was compressed inside has spilled out in a single convulsive release. "The patrollers will come," Mercy says, her voice steady despite her tears. "By morning, maybe sooner. Someone will notice. Someone will sound the alarm." "Let them come," Silas rumbles. "What can they do that's worse than what's already been done to us?" "They can kill us," Caleb points out, but there's no fear in his voice, only a kind of exhausted acceptance. "Slowly, probably. Make examples. String us up in the town square." "Maybe," Ezekiel says, speaking for the first time since leaving the chapel. His voice sounds strange to his own ears, as though it belongs to someone else, someone who has just crossed a threshold that can never be recrossed. "Or maybe we run. Head north before dawn. The river's not far. We could be in Maryland by tomorrow night if we move fast." They look at each other, these 4 people who have just shattered the fundamental order of their world, and the same calculation plays across each face. Run and maybe survive, maybe make it to freedom, maybe find something resembling a life beyond these walls, or stay and face certain death, but at least die having struck back, having refused the passive acceptance that has defined their entire existence. "I'm too old to run," Mercy says quietly. "Too old and too tired. Whatever comes, I'll face it here." "I'll run," Caleb says immediately. "I ain't dying for this place. I ain't giving them the satisfaction." Silas considers for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I'll stay," he finally decides. "Someone needs to tell you what happened here. Someone needs to make sure the story doesn't get twisted into something it wasn't. I'll stay, and I'll speak the truth. And if they hang me for it, at least I'll hang as a man who chose his own fate." They all turn to Ezekiel. The question is implicit. What will you do? He thinks of Dinah halfway to Mississippi by now, chains on her wrists and terror in her heart. He thinks of 40 years compressed into service, into invisibility, into the careful erasure of self required to survive in proximity to power. He thinks of Hannah, dead these 12 years, buried in the plot behind the quarters with a marker made of wood that has probably rotted away by now. He thinks of the straight razor resting on the chapel altar, still dark with the cost of resistance. "I don't know," he admits. "I don't know what I'll do, but I know what I've done, and I know I'd do it again." The grandfather clock strikes 1, a single deep note that resonates through the manor's bones. 1 hour past midnight, 1 hour into a new world, or perhaps into the ending of an old one. Outside, the November wind picks up. It rattles windows and howls down chimneys and carries the scent of smoke from somewhere. The forge or the kitchen fire or something else burning. In the distance, maybe real or maybe imagined, comes the sound of dogs. Patrollers moving through the darkness following trails, hunting for something that has disturbed the careful order they're employed to maintain. Or perhaps there are no dogs yet. Perhaps there's still time before the alarm is raised, before the machinery of retribution grinds into motion. Perhaps in this liminal hour between midnight and dawn, between one world and another, there's space for something like choice to exist. Mercy moves toward the kitchen, still clutching her Bible. Silas returns to the library to wait or to prepare, or simply to sit with what he's done. Caleb heads toward the servants' entrance, toward the darkness beyond Dunridge Manor's walls, toward whatever slim chance of survival the night might offer, and Ezekiel climbs the stairs one final time. He returns to the chapel where 12 candles still burn, where Master Cornelius Ashford remains slumped before the altar, where the prayer that was never finished hangs in the air like an accusation or perhaps an answer. He retrieves the straight razor, wipes it clean one final time, and slides it into his pocket. Then he removes Dinah's headscarf from his jacket, unfolds it carefully, and drapes it across the altar where the prayer book lies open. The indigo fabric with its faded yellow flowers looks wrong in this place, too humble for the ornate surroundings, too real among the performance of piety, but perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the whole point is that real things, real suffering, real loss, real resistance, have finally invaded a space that was designed to keep them out. Ezekiel stands in the chapel for a long moment, memorizing it. Not the room itself, which he knows in every detail after 40 years, but this particular configuration, the body and the blood and the unfinished prayer and the evidence that invisibility can become visibility, that service can become refusal, that the order of things is not nearly as fixed as those in power would like to believe. Then he extinguishes the candles one by one. 12 flames snuffed into smoke, 12 points of light surrendering to darkness. When the last candle dies, the chapel is consumed by shadow so complete it's almost tangible. He makes his way back downstairs in darkness, navigating by touch and memory. The front door stands open. Has someone already fled, or is it simply an invitation to the night? He steps out onto the veranda, into air that tastes of frost and smoke, and something electric, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Dunridge Manor rises behind him, 3 stories of brick and rot, 73 years of accumulated sin given physical form. In the darkness it looks almost peaceful, almost innocent. Just another Virginia plantation house sleeping through the small hours. But Ezekiel knows what it contains now, what it has always contained, what it will continue to contain long after. This night becomes history or legend or cautionary tale. Does he run? Does he stay? The narrative deliberately refuses to answer, leaving Ezekiel standing on the threshold between captivity and freedom, between past and future, between one identity and another. Perhaps he vanishes into the Virginia night, heading north toward places where a man might be a man rather than property. Perhaps he's caught before dawn by patrollers with dogs and guns and righteous fury. Perhaps he simply walks into the darkness and keeps walking, becoming one more ghost in a land full of ghosts, one more story whispered in quarters and cabins, and around fires where the dispossessed gather to remember. What matters is not whether he escapes, but that he tried. What matters is not the aftermath, but the action itself, the moment when invisible became visible, when silence became violence, when 40 years of compression released in a single, irrevocable instant. The years pass. Dunridge Manor stood empty by 1835. The Ashford line ended, the property too tainted for purchase. The enslaved people who survived that November night scattered to various fates. Some caught and executed, some escaped to freedom, some simply disappeared into the vast uncertainty that characterized black life in antebellum Virginia. The records are incomplete, deliberately obscured, rewritten by those who needed the story to confirm rather than challenge the prevailing order. But the manor remains. The locals give it a wide berth, speaking of it in whispers, attributing to it all manner of supernatural qualities. They say it's cursed. They say at midnight you can still hear prayers that never finish, still see candlelight in the chapel window, still catch the scent of something rotting beneath polish and pretense. They say a man walks those halls with a razor in his hand, forever approaching a moment that has already occurred, forever suspended between service and refusal. Perhaps this is true. Perhaps buildings do absorb what happens within their walls, do become repositories for memory, do refuse to let certain histories be forgotten or sanitized or explained away. Perhaps Dunridge Manor still watches, still witnesses, still holds in its bones the evidence that the order of things is only order until it isn't, that power is only power until it's challenged, that prayers are only answered when someone has the courage to provide the answer themselves. Or perhaps it's simply a decaying building in rural Virginia, slowly being consumed by vegetation and time, remarkable only for its emptiness and its ruin. Either way, travelers on the old Rappahannock Road report that they do not stop at Dunridge Manor. They do not approach its sagging verandas or peer through its darkened windows or investigate the sounds that seem to emanate from within on certain November nights. They simply pass by, sometimes quickly, sometimes with a prayer of their own, not for prosperity or guidance, but for the souls of those who suffered there, who resisted there, who in one terrible midnight claimed agency in the only way left available to them. The true horror of Dunridge Manor was never what happened on November 10th, 1831. The true horror was the 73 years that preceded it, the decades of systematic dehumanization that made that night inevitable, the casual cruelties and normalized atrocities that masqueraded as natural order. The Midnight Purge was not the birth of horror, but its culmination. Not the introduction of violence, but the redirection of violence that had always been present, simply aimed in one direction rather than another. And if the manor still stands as a monument to that horror, if it still whispers its stories to those willing to listen, perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps some places should not be allowed to forget. Perhaps some histories should not be permitted to crumble into comfortable ruin. Perhaps memory itself is a form of resistance, a refusal to let suffering be transformed into statistics or footnotes or the embarrassing, but ultimately dismissible past. In the chapel, if you were brave enough or foolish enough to enter, you would find the altar still stained. The prayer book has long since rotted away, its gilt-edged pages surrendered to mold and mice. But the altar cloth remains, its embroidered pattern still visible beneath the darkness that no amount of time has quite erased. And draped across that altar, faded but intact, rests a headscarf of indigo fabric patterned with yellow flowers, a daughter's presence marking her father's absence, a testament to love in a place designed to forbid it. The grandfather clock stopped working sometime in the 1840s. Its pendulum hangs motionless now, frozen at 23 minutes past midnight. Whether it stopped naturally or whether some symbolic significance attaches to that particular time is impossible to determine, but visitors who stand in the decaying hall and look up at that silent clock face often report feeling as though time itself has not stopped, but merely paused, as though the manor is waiting for something, as though the story that began on November 10th, 1831, has not yet reached its conclusion. Ezekiel's fate remains unknown. No records exist of his capture or execution. No grave marker bears his name in any cemetery within 50 miles of Dunridge Manor. He simply vanishes from history on that November night, leaving behind only questions and legends and the persistent belief among some that he succeeded, that he made it north, that somewhere in Canada or Ohio or some other promised land, he lived out his days as a free man who once was invisible but chose visibility, once was silent but chose to speak, once held a razor to serve but ultimately used it to sever. If this tale of the Dunridge Midnight Purge left you unsettled, subscribe for more macabre histories that refuse to stay buried. Tell me in the comments, would you dare spend a night in Dunridge Manor? Until next time, remember, some prayers are never answered and some are answered in blood.